Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds. We are back again. This is going to be an interesting one. Our boy Tyler here, I'll introduce him in a second, has been emailing us with some really interesting facts about just the overall health of the Indian River. And it's horrible. Like, you read some of the stuff and like, man, what in the world? And one thing in particular that I don't think gets enough attention, and we're not trying to pinpoint and say this is the problem, but this is more about awareness. This is going to be a discussion. And there is one thing, actually. Let me put this into a question format. What if you discovered that there were 5,000 people, let's just call it a small business, 5,000 people started a little thing, a cult, whatever you want to call it, and they said, we're going to destroy about 220 million pounds of seagrass in Florida over the next year. And they said that's going to be their mission. We'd all want them put in prison. Like, we'd burn them at the stake. Let's stone them. Like, we'd be pissed. And sadly, that's about the number that manatees are going to eat. And this is not their fault. This is what they were born to do. They eat seagrass. It's part of their diet. And I don't think the average person knows that a manatee in general is consuming about 100 pounds of seagrass, the stuff that, our estuaries rely on, the stuff that we rely on as fishermen, right? To find everything from trout and redfish and snook. I mean, it's kind of been called the liver of our inshore fisheries. And it's dying like crazy, not just over there on the East Coast where we're going to focus today, but really all over the place. And one of the kind of culprits in this whole thing, it's not the culprit, is manatees. And it's horrible because they're starving to death. And there's some issues with the power plants and how reliant on they are. And they're not migrating south like they should be. And we're going to talk about all this stuff, but it's certainly eye-opening. And hopefully we have a couple of different solutions, and we're looking for feedback. So I want to preface that we're looking for feedback on all this. This is not us saying this is how it's going to be and this is the problem, but it certainly is part of the problem. And it seems to only be getting worse. So we've got Tyler Jones. Welcome, my friend. First time on the
Thanks
Salt
for
Strong
having me.
podcast. Yeah, dude. And what's in quick little background before we have Justin kind of go into how we got here? What's your background? You're studying
I'm a
something?
student up at FSU right now. I'm
Yeah.
a history major. I'll be graduating at the end of this month. I'm from Orlando, so when I'm back there, I have a kayak I take out on the Indian River Lagoon quite frequently. Um, Love sight fishing. Recently picked up the fly rod about 6 months ago.
Cool.
I'm loving that. And I'm fortunate enough when I'm up here at school, I wade fish over in the Big Bend. I really feel blessed to be able to fish up here um, and really see what natural Florida really looks like. It's a big contrast to what I see back down in Central Florida. Um, and I think we can have a good discussion about a factor that's often overlooked when it comes to the IRL's recovery and specifically the North IRL.
And so how did you get so involved in just the knowledge part of it? Because you've been emailing Luke and I thesis papers and some pretty interesting studies. Why did you kind of take that path to say, all right, I want to make a change and a difference?
A big part of it is talking to locals and guides. So guys that are, out on the water, they make their living on the water. They're out there multiple times a week. They fished it for, decades, some of them their entire life. And, they really see, what goes on with the lagoon in its entirety. They don't really skip over anything. And, they see things that outsiders may not recognize looking in when it comes to, they see in the news, the lagoon suffering and the seagrass is dying. And when it comes to, different factors in the lagoon's decline, I think it's important to hit on every one. None of them are too minuscule to overlook. And when it comes to manatees, I think it's important to emphasize, we've put them in this position. They wouldn't be starving if it wasn't for us. They wouldn't be, staying in the lagoon year round if it wasn't for us. This is all man-made, and I think it's important to recognize that.
Yeah, love it. Cool. So Justin, how did we get here overall in the IRL?
So the short spark note version is that the health or the ecosystem of IRL, Indian River Lagoon, North Indian River Lagoon, where pretty much the headwaters come in from Turnbull Creek, and then the adjacent Mosquito Lagoon, all of which have virtually no tidal flow. The flow of water throughout those systems are very wind driven out of the north and the south, how much water moves in and out of the area. And the quick backstory is that I think Tyler put it, I think a good time frame with that was about 2009, 2010. We had a major freeze here in Florida. It sadly killed off a very large population of game fish, particularly trout and the snook population through both lagoon systems. But one important thing that Tyler pointed out offline was that it kind of threw off the balance of like chlorophyll A and phytoplankton and the base foundation for life throughout the lagoon system. I mean, a lot died. It was a pretty harsh freeze. It went on for over a week or a week and a half in very cold temperatures. Moving forward was a very slow trickle downward of the current state that we're at now, which is in many areas patchy, dirty water and virtually no seagrass, not like what it was and what it has been for many, many years. Fast forward to about 2015, we had a serious algae bloom. We had I think it was a Vibrio or brown algae related issue. It started, I remember being on the water and in Mosquito Lagoon having pea soup green colored water. Stark contrast from the gin clear water that I've spent, 10 plus years fishing in the lagoon system and having lush, rich seagrass, widgeon grass, manatee grass, ironically, and I believe turtle grass in some areas where it would come up to the surface and it would shoot and there would be runners on the surface where it was just a forest of grass in many locations throughout the lagoon systems. And from about 2015, when we had that algae bloom and it kind of blocked out all the clarity of the water, I mean, it was just green and then it turned into brown for years. We would go through waves. It wasn't all year long, right, Tyler? Like it was periods of time where we'd have 3 to 5 months or 6 months of brown water where the sun could not penetrate said seagrass and it could not photosynthesize and continue to grow. So that blocking of sunlight ended up wiping out a large chunk of the available seagrass. Well, that went on and off, and cycled for a couple of years. We had these algae blooms and the seagrass couldn't filter out all of the algae and the nutrient outflow that we've had, the nutrient input we've had in the lagoon systems. So it kind of compounded to the point where the ecosystem couldn't manage itself. We had an imbalance. Now we're kind of at this point where the wild card thrown into all of this is manatees. And everybody loves manatees. From a public image standpoint, even fishermen. I mean, we're all nature lovers. We love wildlife. And we have a mutual respect for manatees. But one thing that Tyler's going to elaborate on in this podcast is how they have grown in size and presence throughout the lagoon system where they otherwise might not have been nearly as abundant in years past. And I've mentioned on previous podcasts that nothing good happens fast in nature. We're talking hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of years of a system being a certain way, and we as people throwing a wrench into how the lagoon systems normally manage themselves. A period of 10 years is very fast. These changes are very fast, all things considered. The topic of manatees, Tyler, I want you to take the reign and run with this, is how we as people, both the public and fishermen, what is being done to basically nurture and support the presence of manatees and their seeking of the seagrass resource that we have in our lagoon system. They eat so much of it naturally, but they're now in our backyards in large numbers, eating what virtually isn't available to them. And our means to be able to help offset that is a short-term solution to a long-term problem. And it is the migration patterns of these manatees. I think that I'm going to let you take it away, Tyler. I know that's something that you're looking at very closely and doing research on. It's something that fishermen are talking about amongst ourselves. and it's being brought to discussion by larger parties. And I think it's very important because it's a matter of perspective. And I think you have a good idea of what we could be doing to work towards a solution to all of this.
Yeah, for those that don't know, on the east coast of Florida in the 40s through the 70s, we built these power plants, and I believe there's 7 of them currently on the east coast of Florida. And over time, what that's done to the manatees and their natural migration, it's basically artificially extended their range northward. So without these power plants, these animals basically wouldn't be residing year round in the lagoon. It would be more migratory. You would see less of them. And what these power plants have done, they allow them to overwinter. So they can stay there the entire year. And instead of migrating back south, they basically stack up at these power plants. And
talk about why, for someone who might understand why power plants, why are they there?
So I believe the one in Port St. John specifically, that's the one they rely on in the North IRL. That was originally created to power the space station. And the thing is, every one of them is coming towards the end of their functional life. So all these power plants are going to be going offline in the next 10 to 20 years. And these manatees have become so reliant on them that when they do go offline, they likely won't leave the lagoon. And basically with these power plants, these animals, they become so reliant on them that, you know, these are generations of manatees that don't know anything else than staying in the lagoon year round. And basically they don't take any pressure off the grass beds, and their populations have gotten to the point where prior to last year's starvation, which I'm sure many people have heard about, you know, we had upwards of 2,000 animals in the lagoon. And, you know, the studies and the research have shown that without these power plants on the East Coast, you know, their winter range would likely be centered around Biscayne Bay and the Southern Everglades. And you may have a few animals venture as far north as Sebastian Inlet during warmer periods in the winter. And, you know, we have natural springs, I believe, up in the St. John's that they utilize. But what the research is finding is that this Atlantic coast manatee population, 90% of them are relying on these power plant outfalls as their means to stay there in the winter. And, you know, when we as like humans throw, you know, like Justin said, a wrench, you know, into the ecosystem, and, you know, we put something that has that big of an impact in the ecosystem, it has the potential to have significant long-term repercussions. And that's what we've really seen just in the past decade. You know, it took decades to, you know, build up to this. And, you know, these animals basically, when these power plants go offline, they don't know how to migrate on their own. You know, these are generations of animals. They know nothing else. So when these power plants go offline, for those that don't know, manatees can't survive extreme cold temps during the winter. So those that are in the lagoon currently, they will die of cold stress once these power plants inevitably get shut down in the near future.
And I guess that was what I was going with, is they're putting out some type of warmth, some discharge that's, you know, heating up the water and keeping them there. But I mean, it almost sounds like the rate they have to eat to survive and the rate that we're losing seagrass, I mean, there's not going to be that many that make it 10, 20 years is what's really sad.
Yeah, let me clarify something too, because I don't think it's been hit dead on. This is what really surprised me to the actual impact of manatees. As Joe mentioned, 100 pounds, they eat 100 pounds, but that's 100 pounds per day. And that's a line. So when you're talking about 2,000 manatees being in a part of the lagoon, and 2,000 more that naturally would be there, That's over 200,000 pounds of grass that's being eaten per day. That is a significant amount of grass. And so I just want to make sure like that math is what just kind of wowed me to the amount of impact that these animals that we all love, but the amount of impact these animals might have to an estuary.
And there's, just so you guys all, there approximately, there's not a final census on this, but let's just say somewhere around 6,000 total manatees, and that's where that 219 million pounds. So just did 6,000 times 100 pounds a day times 360, because they're doing this every day. They don't take weekends off. They don't go on diets. I mean, unfortunately, they kind of are now, but I mean, it's a crazy amount. So what's being done? We clearly as humans have screwed this up, right? We've taken an animal that is kind of beloved, and I mean, it's on, people have manatee mailboxes and t-shirts, and right, everyone, Justin, your point, loves manatees. Even when we're fishing, like, oh man, look, it's a manatee, we take our phone out, the kids love it. They are beloved animals. We've done this. We've basically stop them naturally from migrating to warmer waters. If you're following the process here, we're keeping them now in areas that they don't belong, and now have run out of food because of other reasons that are mostly man-made. So what's happening? Like what's being discussed? I know there's been some feeding programs that may or may not have worked, and there's been a lot of talk, but I don't know that anything's happened yet.
Yeah, with the feeding program, that was publicized pretty well this past winter. It was on a bunch of local news stations. I'm sure you guys had already heard about it. Basically, this feeding program, it was funded through a grant by Florida Power and Light. And get this is the corporation that owns this Port St. John power plant. And they worked with, I believe, it's a Save the Manatee organization and FWC state agencies to implement this feeding program. And the sad thing is, for the most part, it was really a safe face operation. To a degree, it was a publicity stunt because, we have, after last year's starvation event, we had over 2,000 animals prior, and we have, somewhere in the ballpark of around 1,000 animals that were at the power plant this past winter. These agencies, they were putting maybe enough lettuce into the water to feed roughly 40 to 50 animals. And you have nearly 1,000 animals there, and the rest of them continue to starve. So really, it's sad to a degree that they would go out there, act like they're doing a good thing for the animals, right? And the majority of the animals didn't even touch the food that they put in the water. With the efforts to restore the lagoon recently, the whole idea behind it is reducing the nutrient load going into the estuary. When you're just putting bales of vegetation into the estuary that don't belong there, you're adding nitrogen to the water column. You're putting nutrients in the estuary. So anything that's uneaten really is potential fuel for potential algae blooms. And when it comes to the animals themselves, the ironic thing is that all this is doing is teaching them to be more reliant on humans and more reliant on that power plant. And, in the long run, it's just going to end up being their downfall because, I don't understand the logic behind the program, because once spring comes around, that grass isn't all magically going to come back. They're going to continue to starve just like last year. Now that it's spring, these animals are going to disperse from that power plant as that water warms. And I mean, just 3 weeks ago, I was out on the water and I saw a full-grown one washed up. And I'll likely see more of these animals washed up throughout the rest of the year. And it's really sad to see, these state agencies that are supposed to be, managing our wildlife resources, framing it as a positive thing for the animals in the estuary. So.
Yeah, I thought it was never a good thing to be feeding animals, like from gators to sandhill cranes. I mean, it's
That's what I thought too.
yeah, I mean, it's short term. I mean, I think there's people who could say, yeah, and cheer them on, but I mean, long term, to your point, especially if you have now a generation or multi-generations of any animals who are relying on humans, in this case, a power plant and or some feeding program or programs, it just doesn't end well. It's sad. Um,
I was gonna say,
yeah,
how else do you get them to migrate though? I mean, it's not like still like doing a cookie crumb with lettuce down south. Like what can actually be done that
but
that
isn't
would
lettuce?
actually
Let's talk. Is lettuce is that a myth? The manatees they love lettuce? It's not like hamburger for a pizza for humans, is it?
I mean, if I can interject, like I worked with manatees in captivity for an aquarium, a public aquarium for a while, and I mean that's what they eat in captivity, but we don't have romaine lettuce just growing out in the lagoon system, so no.
That's also all they have. It's like being I won't go there. All right. So to Luke's question, and this is the kind of feedback we want, that we're not we don't have the solution. We're going to come up with a couple ideas, but let's just say tomorrow we knew that these power plants are going to go offline. I assume these are all coal fire power plants. At some point they go offline. How do we get manatees to do what they were supposed to do and start migrating versus starving or dying because of being frozen?
I want to touch on that. So the study that discusses these warm water refuges for them, it emphasizes, how reliant they become on these power plants. And it was written by officials from the Marine Mammal Commission and the Mote Marine Laboratory in Sarasota. And they say weaning these animals off the reliance on these hydrothermal power sources is the only way to restore migration. And it really is quite simple. They discuss how simply basically creating metal posts and using them as a fence to gradually move them farther away from the water source would eventually get these animals to move on and find a warmer source of water farther south. And then again, you have to do it gradually. You can't just cut off their access entirely overnight. They wouldn't know what to do, but it emphasizes that basically weaning them off of it and teaching them to be less reliant on the warm water source is how to go about it. So
No different than cattle. I mean, they're called the sea cow. Use fences and you get them to move and eat grass somewhere else.
yep.
Justin, what else
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
No, I'm remembering the recent podcast we did where I made mention to, that proposal to NOAA for implementing artificial heaters or units to be able to provide heated areas around passes and inlets throughout Florida. This was right after the freeze in 2009, 2010. I was in college. I wrote a mock grant proposal to NOAA saying, I really don't want to see another decline of snook and sea trout, and I want to know that my kids and future generations can enjoy the game fish that it was just like heart-wrenching to see so many float belly up during the freeze 10 plus years ago. Created this proposal where we'd implement artificial heating in key locations where there's a lot of water flow during the wintering season, so that all kinds of species, not just game fish, but migratory birds and manatees potentially and other animals could find safe haven. And NOAA's response to that proposal when I was in school was, we are not in support of artificial means to be able to help nature carry on. Like, that isn't the path that we want to go. We'd rather a natural implementation of habitat to be able to restore or help, the ecosystem rebound. That was their view and their approach. And essentially what's happening with these power plants is just that. It's an artificial means of allowing life to carry on in a manner that it naturally wouldn't do otherwise. If we didn't have the power plants and we'd have this wintering period, you're right, Tyler, like they would likely figure a way to say we need to venture on and hopefully resort back to their natural means of migration during that time of the year. So when you brought that into light, that I mean, it made me immediately think, like, makes sense. Like, NOAA wasn't in support of artificial means to help things rebound, and we shouldn't be today.
So using that fence would essentially just block them from going to an artificially created warm zone that just is already there. So interesting.
Just like cabins for clean water. Let it flow. Let them flow south. Let them flow south. I mean, it is, but I mean, it goes back to natural. It's the stuff that we've done as humans, unfortunately.
So has anybody been serious about actually making that sort of some sort of fence or something around the power plants? How is that going? It seems like that's
the thing. When it comes to managing, these animals and this basically a massive herd of grazing animals that's still there, they haven't come up with any long-term solution yet, and that's what's sad. I hope in the future that they do encourage a natural migration. No doubt it's going to be costly, but I mean, the feeding program they implemented this past winter was costly, and really
how much was it? I remember seeing it was a pretty bigger number than I thought.
I don't know
a bunch of lettuce.
But, okay. It was definitely up there in the millions in taxpayer dollars, and then they had the grants given to them. But I mean, it's coming up with a Band-Aid solution that really isn't going to have any long-term impact, and it's only going to have negative consequences here down the line. So I think them trying to go back to the drawing board and come up with real hard solutions, and this goes for all of the lagoons issues. And I mean, the North IRL, the issues it's facing with these animals, with the nutrient loading, it's totally different than that of the South IRL. It's really, the North IRL, which is basically from Sebastian to Ponce Inlet. You have the Banana River there, you have the Mosquito Lagoon, the North Indian River up by Turnbow Creek, Titusville. It's really an ecosystem within an ecosystem, and there's no tidal flow. And it's just like the issues it has are so much different than that of other portions of the lagoon. And I think, and we haven't really had any advocacy like they've had down south, for the southern portion of the lagoon, Pine Island Sound on the Gulf Coast, the Everglades. We don't really have a major advocacy voice when it comes to that. Yes, there's some groups that are working on major restoration projects and research to monitor all these factors. But I think moving forward, it's definitely important, and we should really try to envision getting a group together that works to implement real functional solutions towards bettering both the welfare of these animals and restoring the health of the lagoon. So
where's all that extra tax money going?
I'm not 100% sure. There's been a lot of talk lately about audits when it comes to how this restoration money, when it comes to lagoon restoration, these programs. And I do believe to some degree there needs to be more transparency when it comes at the county and local level. That's definitely an issue I think we run into on the East Coast of Central Florida when it comes to how these dollars are being spent, and if they're being spent on logical solutions.
Justin, do you know? I mean, I saw some stat. I mean, it was tens of millions of dollars, that was in this fund, and I have not really heard of how it was deployed.
No, I'm not sure either. Kind of in the gray on that.
Okay, I believe my friend Peter Deeks is a little bit closer to that, and might have to get him on to discuss. See where that's going. Well, cool. And what else? Anything else in terms of potential solutions? And I mean, part of it is growing seagrass, right? But that's even having a problem. What are your thoughts there, Tyler and Justin as well, on what? Because it's not just the manatees eating it, even the stuff that we're planting even if manatees are kept out, seems to not be doing that well.
When it comes to the grass growth
Mhm.
in the North IRL, I think it's important to recognize, I think it was the Marine Resources Council. They do a report card nearly annually on the health of the lagoon and, you know, the different portions of it. And just this year, what they're recognizing, we had cleaner water for the most part in the North IRL. Banana, you could see 6-7 feet down almost the entire year. The North IRL had relatively clear water. Mosquitoes was improved over the past year, but what they're seeing is that the habitat, which to them, the major indicator is seagrass, the habitat isn't recovering. It isn't coming back like it should. Because when you have clear water, you know, and it looks like clean water, that grass is supposed to be able to regrow. So they're just getting to the point where they're recognizing, oh, there may be other factors that need to be taken into account when it comes to this seagrass's recovery. You know, what else is hindering it? I believe they test on the state panels for water quality testing. They're testing for nitrogen, phosphorus, and I believe chlorophylls on there. And in that report card, they talked about they think they needed to be expanded to where they're testing for herbicides, fertilizers going into the water. I do believe herbicides can play a big role in seagrass die-offs. Basically, it's glyphosate. It's almost like spraying Roundup in the water. It's meant for invasive aquatic plants, but it, you know, it doesn't discriminate from what plants it kills in the water. And I believe Brevard just this past year, they increased their spending on spraying. So I do believe that's another large factor that needs to be taken into account. And when it comes to the manatees, I mean, you know, I've seen these animals literally crawl up on their bellies with their backs out of the water to get up, you know, to the seagrass. And the only places you see grass growth in the lagoon are these shallowest flats where these animals can't access. There's a guide I know that he literally has a video. He was out in Mosquito Lagoon, I believe, and he was up on a shallow flat, and the entire flat was barren. And this is to demonstrate basically what these manatees are doing to the grass. And then there was a branch, a submerged branch coming out from the shoreline, and in between the branches, you know, that log, the grass was, I mean, it was probably a foot up to the surface, and it was thick. And it just shows you that these animals in the lagoon in its current state, the grass doesn't have a chance if they have access to it. And when it comes, like you said about artificial grass planting, the success rate for planting artificial grass globally is dismally low. I believe it's something around 35% for the success rate, and artificially planted grass never is as thick, and it doesn't support as much life as, you know, naturally growing seagrasses.
You know, something I really want to piggyback on, I don't know if I've ever told the guys this, but you want to talk about the lengths at which these animals will go to be able to find food. I have GoPro footage of, you mentioned the shallows being the area that these, you know, manatees will venture to be able to get food. There are mosquito impoundments throughout the Mosquito Lagoon system that I've accessed via kayak. And in early 2021, January, February 2021, I found an impoundment that had, I mean, to me, it was a throwback. I was seeing, you know, that really tall, stocky grass that looks almost like wheat, kind of yellowish in color. It was found in certain parts of South Mosquito Lagoon before, and this impoundment was full of it. I found tailing redfish and grass, and I about shed a tear because I haven't seen a lot of that in many years. It's very special to me. I caught 3 redfish. About a month later, I went back to that same general area in March 2021, and I found 2 manatee in there. I said, okay, cool. I found their way into the impoundment. I revisited that area recently for an insider report that I didn't include, went into that same impoundment, and there was 0 grass. I mean, I'm talking acres of grass in this impoundment. And in a matter of a year, and I'm almost positive that people that are maintaining the opening and closure of this impoundment for National Wildlife Refuge is not spraying in that particular impoundment, to the best of my knowledge. I don't know if that's a factor of why there is grass in rich abundance one year and then the very next year there is none. I'm not one to point fingers, but I'm trying to just acknowledge all the variables as to why. I mean, that's an area that boats can't access. The general public isn't really accessing on the water aside from a handful of kayakers every now and then. I thought it was interesting that in a short period of a year, literally 12 months, to go back to that same area and there'd be zero grass and zero fish back up in that impoundment. So I thought that was really interesting.
But a couple of manatees that you saw in there. It's wild.
More than likely, residents.
Yeah, building off of that, I mean, if you saw the animals in there, I can almost guarantee that, you know, they were the factor that, you know, that consumed all that grass in there. You know, there were flats and portions of Mosquito last year. I heard reports there were flats that had grass growing up to the surface, like you said, in a foot, 2 feet of water. And as soon as those manatees find it, with the amount of food they're able to consume, I mean, it's gone within a week. There's flats in the North IRL that were growing grass last year. The manatees got to it, and when one of them finds it, usually more with them. So there's usually multiple, and they can consume acres of vegetation like it's nothing. And I mean, this study here talks about, you know, it was conducted in the North Banana River in the early 90s, actually, when, you know, the lagoon was considered healthy and it had lush seagrass on virtually every flat. And it's up by the Space Center. And so this is an area where, you know, boats can't prop scar the flat. And it was a known flat that they knew manatees came to graze at. They put in an observation tower and they took aerial photos from, I believe, the years 90 to 94. And what they did, basically, they took 4 13 by 13 meter enclosures, and 2 of them were gated off so the manatees could not get within them. And the other 2 allowed the manatees to get in and access the grass. And what they found is that the exclosures that didn't allow the manatees to get in retained all their seagrass biomass and had growth up to nearly the surface in 2 feet of water. And the other zones that allow them to access it, they had literally 90% of the seagrass biomass removed. They talk about in the study how high densities of grazing manatees in some areas of the IRL have been reported to disturb up to 40% of the seagrass beds and remove 80 to 96% of the seagrass leaf biomass. So that, I mean, that just puts into perspective how much food these animals are consuming. And I mean, in the lagoon's current state, it's way past the carrying capacity, you know, when it comes to being able to sustain these animals. There is no food for them. So, I mean, when they do disperse from this plant in the spring, you know, they're going to go on these flats. They'll eat up whatever grass is trying to grow back, but they will continue to starve because it's just not sustainable. So
it said, yeah, and we'll put a link to those reports. Tyler had sent that over to us prior, and it is. I mean, they show the aerial pictures, and it's clear as day that the areas that are enclosed are full of lush grass, and the areas that were open have nothing. It just looks like mud.
I'll just throw this out too, just so it doesn't seem like we're just totally targeting manatees. But I've seen a very a shockingly bad decline in seagrass here in around St. Pete, Florida, in Tampa Bay, and I haven't seen any uptick in manatees. So, you know, a lot of the issues are actual water related, and the manatees are just in this case just certainly not helping the situation. It seems like the biggest issue over there in Mosquito Lagoon and IRL is just the fact that they're kept there, and it sounds like actually normally they're not even north of Sebastian. So most of the Mosquito, really all of the Mosquito Lagoon and all North Indian River, the fact that any are there is not natural. And how many were in those studies? It was like over 1,000, right?
So prior to this mass starvation, which I'm sure many people have heard about, is publicized. It's how they've gotten so much attention in the past couple of years. Last year they had over 1,000 manatees die statewide, and over half of those were in Brevard. But prior to the starvation, we had upwards of 2,000 animals. So they're consuming roughly, 300,000 pounds of seagrass per day. And, I don't care, what anybody says, those aren't natural numbers. They would not be, the lagoon can't sustain that many massive grazing animals over time. So, inevitably they were going to have some negative impact at some point. And then, once all that, once the water quality declined and, the grass died off, for the most part, these animals have just been left to starve, and, their behavior, they're programmed in such a way where they're not going to leave until they're all gone, basically. So, that's just the sad state of affairs that, we're looking at in the North Indian River Lagoon.
Yeah, it's sad. Well, man, I'm glad. I'm really glad you've been emailing us all this. It's I love, and if anyone has studies on anything, I mean, the seagrass stuff it's definitely at the top of our list of just issues that we want to be involved in and find ways to solve. To Luke's point, the manatees aren't the problem. Well, I guess they are, but it's almost like we set a forest fire as humans, and the manatees are just dry season, which is natural, right? I mean, it's dry season sucks for forest fires. There's no rain come down, and it's so unfortunate that they're the ones suffering for basically things that we've done. And I don't know that there is a quick and fast solution. It's clearly not spending tens of millions to feed them lettuce. I don't think that really solves the longer term problem. But we'd love to hear from you guys. So, in the comment section, comment away. We as long as you guys keep it friendly and peaceful, and we don't have anyone trying to take things too far, we'll keep it up there. And we'd love to hear from you. Love to hear of any solutions or studies that have worked in other places, because this is going to be a continued conversation, a continued topic for sure. And certainly just the lagoon in general will be a topic on just how to get things back to maybe not to the 1930s or 40s or whenever it was in its prime, but even just back to 20, 30 years ago. I mean, it's crazy how much has happened in just a couple of decades. And then, I mean, we'll be talking more about St. Pete too. I mean, Luke has mentioned as he lives there and has for quite a few years, and just watching this, not even like a slow gradual, it's been happening pretty fast, and yet very few people are talking about it over there. So going to continue to raise awareness, and but ultimately try to come up with solutions. Awareness is great. It only helps, but at some point we got to come up with some solutions. So Tyler, thank you so much for coming on and sharing. Justin, thank you. I know you're in your vehicle still, hopefully getting close to home. Cool. Anything else, Justin, Luke, Tyler?
No, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Justin, thank you as always. Lukey, thank you. And yeah, please do leave us comments. If you're watching this on the YouTube, you can leave a comment there, but the best way for it to reach us is to go to saltstone.com. In the fishing tips section, you'll see this post, and at the very bottom, there's a place to leave a comment. We would love to hear from you. Otherwise, we'll talk to you on the next episode. Peace. We out. Whoop, whoop.